Well, thank you very much for those four fascinating case studies of different governance experience. I mean, I think we've seen in Estonia their drive to personalised medicine with an ethics committee sitting aside, Michael in Tehran with perhaps more direct ethics involvement, Madeline with the Allspec generational study now, and their Alex and pre-Alex, but very much participant involvement. And finally, Dan again with another generational study with their ethics advisory board that really does ask quite specific questions on the consent about what the participants will and won't allow. So perhaps if we can have some questions. Gentleman at the back there.
Hi, thanks very much for the talks. My name's Will Bowen, I'm from the Health Research Authority. I have a comment and a question. So I was interested to hear that there were some issues with NHS REC approvals, and what I'd like to say is that one thing that we would like to do is work with this community so that we can understand the unique issues that are around establishing these banks and data sets. And so that's an open invitation to anybody who wishes to get in contact with the HRA, because we do acknowledge that there are some unique and changing issues within the ethical landscape around this, so we would very much appreciate people's opinions. My question is around the uptake of different ethnicities into donation, and so looking at perhaps cultural differences in attitudes towards the sharing of data and the use of data and tissue, and whether there is any benefit in having a stratified approach to recruitment to ensure that there is a decent sample from different ethnicities.
I might ask Michael to answer that, because you did mention that a little bit in your talk.
You mean the sharing of data, sharing of tissue collected from participants? Is that your questions?
How do you ensure that there's a fair reflection of the different ethnicities that you have within your country? Is there any benefit to, or did you stratify your recruitment?
Well, okay. Our biobank started in 2012, only about 2 years ago, and the research team would like to start, taking sample from original, Aboriginal people, the indigenous people, but EGC has not approved that. EGC insisted that they should do the, general population first, and later move to that area. So for the time being, that ethnical problem has not yet risen. But I know eventually they will, because the Aboriginal people has protested that their privacy and also, their sensitivity has been taken lightly, you see, because, they've been regarded as drunken, and they like to drink, they like to chew, betel nuts, and they feel that is a label, sort of, labeling upon, their, special group of people. So EGC so far has not approved, any, information or data taken from those people yet. But I know this is a sensitive issue we have to face someday anyway. Yeah.
I mean, I know in UK Biobank it's very much a representative sample or generalisable. And I think, again, I don't want to speak for them, but I think they were thought that actually money would be better spent with perhaps investing in specific biobanks for specific ethnic groups rather than trying to sample, say, 5% of certain ethnic groups. So actually go to a particular area where there's a particular population of a particular group of people. And actually, I think they felt that money might be better targeted there, because again, I don't know about the Framingham study, but I suspect it's white, probably middle class. So I think you've just got to work out where you're going to target your money. But I mean, obviously, it's something we need to think about. Okay, I think this gentleman was first, and then next.
Thanks. It's Sean Griffin. I work at Human Tissue Authority and the Health Research Authority with Will as well. So I would have made the very same point that he made about feeding back to the HRA about your Allspec experience. We'd be very keen to learn from that. But I did wanted to flag the Research Tissue Bank scheme that's been established by the Health Research Authority and the Human Tissue Authority, and that means that research tissue banks that have a Human Tissue Authority license get established as a research tissue bank by a research ethics committee that's flagged for biobanks, and there are a number of those in England, and that means that you don't need to seek individual ethics committee approval for each individual project, because there's an expectation that there will be a governance framework around the biobank that will have an arrangement around access to the samples. So it's not dissimilar to the Ethics and Governance Council, but in my experience, they tend to be more strongly linked to the resource. And so UK Biobank will be one of those. And there's some case studies on both the HTA and HRA websites where the AstraZeneca and the University of Manchester, an industry and academic example, have benefited from that scheme. So, and I think finally, just to say that, you know, if anybody does want some advice, we've certainly advised Genomics England on their project and had a meeting with Research Ethics Committee chairs to advise them. So, thank you.
Bill Lawrence again. A question for Dr. Levy. Seems to me that you, like Altsbach, are in a good position to learn a lot about younger people's attitudes to research. I was struck by some of the figures you presented, and I wonder if you'd tell us whether you're doing anything systematic with colleagues, perhaps, to think about how young people come to these studies.
Yeah, it's a great question. I can tell you that I think one of our great advantages in Framingham that has resulted in such high rates of consent and participation is the fact that participants have their parents and grandparents involved in the study. When we recruited the third generation cohort beginning about 12 years ago, these were people who were 20 years of age and older. Virtually there wasn't a day in our clinic when at least one participant didn't say, I've waited my whole life to join the study. And for that reason, because of that level of family participation, our younger generation has been extremely involved in our study. I think the younger generation also tends to be a little bit more knowledgeable about scientific matters. Interestingly, they're also much more engaged in terms of electronic media, and our approaches to getting our participants informed and actively involved in study activities includes things like email notifications and maintaining a website. We're planning studies that might include electronic devices, using their iPhones to enter data, using their iPhones or activity monitors to monitor physical activity. So our young generation is extremely engaged, but again, in part because of their family involvement. I'm not sure that young people recruited de novo in the community would be quite as engaged as our younger generation of participants are in Framingham.
That's very helpful.
Jane Kay, University of Oxford. Thank you very much for your really interesting presentations. And the one thing that struck me about all of them is that they're talking about engaging participants in the research in different ways. One of the things about UK Biobank is that it hasn't done that in the same way, even though Mike's talk this morning demonstrated that over the last 10 years, there's been quite a significant change where participants have actually come back for new measures, new studies to be done on them. So my question for the panel is, if we were going to encourage UK Biobank to actually engage their participants more, what do you think the benefits would be for the research done on UK Biobank?
Andreas, you want to take that question?
The benefits for people or benefits for research? So, returning data, first of all, we have to prepare data, and and the data have to be trustful. And that means that, that's why we don't return anything yet. But I believe that in coming years, science will move so far that we actually can do something which is useful also people. But I see kind of two things. First of all, we have to really work through these systems and make this data understandable so that together with medical professionals, people can understand it and change their, let's say, lifestyle or medication or whatever just to improve their life. But on return, of course, we also see from the feedback how these changes actually are changing, or these recommendations are changing their real life. So people, it's easy to tick a box that I would like to change my lifestyle. If you just give me genetic data, 80% will do so. But if you really have to go out and jog and it's raining, you can find 10 reasons not to go. So we have to see what really happens if we use this new information, which has not been done so in large scale. So I see that we are going to learn quite a bit on this process when we return data back to the people, and it will be used in real life, not like a project or small group or selected trial.
If I could also just say something very quickly. I think there are some good ethical reasons for doing it, but there are some very, very good pragmatic reasons for doing it. If you want to think about the benefit, one of the things that I've often been told is that every time you contact a cohort study or a biobank, you lose numbers of your participants. Now, that I don't disagree with that, but if you involve your participants in the governance of the biobank or the cohort study that they're in, you are much more likely to retain your participants because you maintain the trust, because the people in the room know exactly what it's like to be, excuse me, know exactly what it's like to be a participant. You've got a much better chance of ensuring retention than otherwise if you don't. That would be my pragmatic argument is keeping the cohort going, and that is, if you don't have the cohort, you don't have anything, you don't have the science.
Lunch is coming, so if we have one final question.
Hi, Mariana Bledsoe, George Washington University and the International Society for Biological and Environmental Repositories. Thank you all for very interesting presentations. One of the key questions, I think, when it comes to involving participants in the governance of a biobank is sort of how do you decide who speaks for the community, who speaks for participants? So I was wondering if you could address what criteria and process you use for identifying those individuals to serve on your governance committees.
It's in terms of serving on the ALEC, it's a volunteer process. People are targeted via the newsletters and the Facebook. But because that is targeting, as you will expect, a very particular group of very motivated young people, we don't want to exclude the others. And that is why we are also doing the additional qualitative research to understand the views of the broader cohort, and also then taking that out to this engagement exercise. Because I don't think whatever method you use that you're going to get a completely representative group.
Do you have anything to,
more than one method.
Do you have anything to add to that, Dan, or anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, I agree with points that were made about the last two questions, and they relate to each other. And one is the importance of engaging study participants. That will keep them more actively involved and more likely to return should you have another exam. In Framingham, between serial exams that are done in our clinic, we often have sometimes mail-out questionnaires or ancillary studies. Again, getting participants more involved and more aware of what's going on is critical to their participation. I mentioned one thing we do to maintain engagement using our regular newsletter. We also work with the local media to make sure that the research that we're conducting gets published and that the people living in the community hear about the research that's being done based on their time and their blood samples and their DNA. It gets written up in the local newspapers and that gets fed back to them. I mentioned a website, which is something that we do. I heard it mentioned just in the last comments about Facebook and Twitter. We haven't quite gotten to that yet, but we've discussed those kinds of activities. So I pretty much agree with everything I heard there about those types of approaches to increase engagement and as a consequence of that participation.
Okay, I think that wraps it up. And I just once again like to thank the speakers and half two.